All right, you're under oath. Is it Dr. Turk, Mr. Turk?
No, it is Mr.
Mr. Turk? All right, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Turk.
Good morning.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Marcus Turk, T-U-R-K.
And Mr. Turk, where are you currently employed?
I own my own corporation. It is a Georgia corporation, M. Turk Enterprises, Inc. I work for myself.
And did you previously work for the DeKalb County Schools?
I did.
And in what capacity did you work for them?
Most recently, I was under an administrative transfer deal. I'm not sure what the title was. Prior to that, I was Chief Financial Officer for slightly more than 5 years.
And during the period that you worked for the DeKalb County School District, was Dr. Eugene Walker a member of the school board?
In fact, he was.
And did you have an opportunity to work with Dr. Walker while you were the Chief Financial Officer?
Yes.
And what were your job and duties as the Chief Financial Officer?
To manage primarily a budget of slightly more than $1.1 billion for all funds combined, to manage a dwindling staff that went from just around 70 members to right at about 40, where we handled all of the financial functions of the school district, including writing payroll checks, accounts payable checks, as well as making sure that retirement funds were allocated properly, paid properly, taxes were paid properly, and schools received funds that they were allocated as necessary.
And I know you said you worked for DeKalb County Schools for 5 years, but what was the time period?
Actually, I was Chief Financial Officer for just over 5 years. I started with DeKalb Schools in January of 1996, and I left June 30th, 2012.
What were your other positions with DeKalb County?
They were all within the finance department.
Hold on just a second. Did you say 5 years?
As Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, you said, but you started in 96?
Yes, with
okay.
the district.
So you were some other position?
Yes.
Gotcha. All righty.
And what were those other positions you had with the district?
I started as an inventory auditor within the finance department. I moved to accountant. I moved to the director or assistant director for accounting. I ended up being the director of finance. From director of finance, I became chief financial officer, all spanning a 16-year period, 16 and a half.
And did you also work with Superintendent Cheryl Atkinson as the Chief Financial Officer?
Yes, briefly.
And how long did you work with her?
It was 2 to 3 months.
Does the district administration prepare the school district's budget?
Yes, it is prepared under the direction of the superintendent by the finance department, headed by the chief financial officer.
And how does the administration provide the board with a copy of the budget?
At the time, currently I'm not sure, but I will tell you what happened when I was chief financial officer. There was a lot of input that was gathered. We started with our ears to the ground, finding out what was going on at a state level. A large portion of the funding for the general operations budget came from the state Department of Education, is appropriated through the General Assembly. The other came from local taxes through property taxes and the millage rate that was incurred as a part of it. We started early in the school year, October, November, December, trying to get and gather enough information to provide an analysis of the direction that the funds may be going, either up or down. And we would find out what the governor was thinking as best we could. We attended meetings, we attended peer group review sessions, we shared information among school districts, we talked to state officials as best we could. And we repeated or replicated that same process locally. We talked to the tax commissioner, we talked to the tax assessor, we tried to stay plugged in to get that information. As the information came in and we were able to provide reasonably accurate estimates as best they could without being solid, then we started communicating that information to the superintendent, and the superintendent provided that information to the Board of Education. From there, once we had an idea of what our revenues would be, again from the state and from the local areas, We then started trying to match to make sure that the expenditures went to a meaningful purpose, fitting within the revenues that we identified as best we could. We started working through scenarios as well as options for things that we could do to make sure that the budget met the needs of students, met the needs of the DeKalb County citizens, and was able to move forward with the priorities of the superintendent and the Board of Education.
And did the Board of Education have any input into how the budget itself?
In fact, they did. The Board of Education was broken into committees, and one of the committees was the Budget and Finance Committee. It was later changed or renamed to the Budget, Finance, and Facilities Committee, and Budget, Audit, Finance, and Facilities Committee. I'm sorry, the audit portion was added in. But yes, the budget certainly went through that committee, and they had input. It was a section of the board. The board selected who would serve on each of the committees. The administration had no say in that, no vote in that, no choice in that, but we worked with whoever was on the committee and presented the information that we came up with. The idea was for the committee to then review the information, make sure it was meaningful, make sure it was relevant, and then present that information to the full board.
During the period you were CFO, did Dr. Walker serve on the Budget Committee?
Yes.
And did you work closely with the Budget Committee in your capacity as CFO?
We presented information to the Budget Committee. There was a fine line to make sure that the board was not micromanaging. The recommendation actually came from the superintendent, so the superintendent went to bat for the staff and allowing the staff and serving as a mediator of some sense to present the information in front of the board. We were actually accessible to make sure that we can answer questions related to the information that was provided, but closely is within that respect.
Okay. And you mentioned the word micromanaging. Did Dr. Walker, did you believe he was micromanaging the budget process?
No.
Did you believe Dr. Walker was behaving in an unprofessional way?
Objection, Your Honor. That's a leading question.
Well, I don't
Can
know
you
the answer, yes or no.
Can you? Yeah, I don't think that's leading.
Just because it's a yes or no, she's suggesting the answer that she doesn't want.
Well, rephrase the question, perhaps.
Okay. Did Dr. Walker, was there anything about his behavior that made you question whether he would be a fit member of the Board of Education?
No.
And do you know if Dr. Walker served as the chairperson of the Budget Committee at any time?
At some point, Dr. Walker did.
Okay. Your communications with Dr. Walker, did they follow the board's chain of command policy?
As best we could, yes. As best I can remember, yes.
Okay. When you were the CFO of the DeKalb County Schools, did the district ever have an end-of-the-year deficit?
Not ever.
And do you know how many times in the history of the DeKalb County Schools the district has had an end-of-the-year deficit?
One.
And do you know what period of time that was?
It was the year after I left, or the year that I was removed from being Chief Financial Officer.
And what year was that?
It was fiscal year 2012.
And do you know who the superintendent was at that time?
It was Dr. Cheryl L.H. Atkinson.
And do you know why the district had an end-of-the-year deficit for that year?
Well, I do not know why specifically, because the formal audit report by the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts has not been released. However, the simple answer is that the revenues came in short of the expenditures, and the expenditures were extremely above what was targeted or budgeted. And it ate up not only the part of the financial statement that was budgeted, but dug deeper into the reserves and ate all of the reserves up as well. I think some leading factors are that there were multiple people being paid for the same position classification that weren't budgeted. I believe, and again, I haven't seen the financial statements to verify, but I believe that There were a number of consultants on the board.
Objection, Your Honor. To the extent that he's just testified that he's not aware of the report, we'd like to request that he not testify as to the financial status of the county at that time.
Well, he says he's not aware of the report, but he testified that he's aware of some of the factors that went into the district going into a deficit.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead. You can answer the
I
question.
think I lost my place. I'm sorry.
We were talking about some of the factors that...
There were a number of consultants in place that simply were not a part of the budget. The Superintendent Atkinson inherited a budget that she did not build, but it doesn't appear that she adhered to the budget that she inherited.
And you mentioned a few moments ago that there were people who were being paid in the same position. What did you mean by that?
As I said, my last 6 months or so with the school district, I was still being compensated as the chief financial officer because I was under contract. There were a number of people in and out of the position. There were a lot of hands attempting to do the work, either hired, either temporary, either interim, that were elevated to the point to do the work, as well as a number of consultants on hand that were working to, again, try and get the same work done as before. The same thing happened with human resources, the same thing happened with instruction, and a number of other departments. So new staff came in, old staff was still there. The old staff was budgeted, the new staff was not. Hence, you find your first DeKalb Schools deficit in DeKalb Schools history.
Now, was the Board of Education, Dr. Walker specifically, involved in the hiring of these individuals who caused the school to incur these additional costs?
To my knowledge, no.
Do you know who was responsible for bringing these people in?
The direct answer is Human Resources, the Human Resources Department. Human Resources Department was likely directed to post the position because the superintendent authorized it. There were no...
At this point, he's just speculating at this
we'll
point.
move on. Okay.
All right.
You mentioned the Georgia Department of Audits. What is their role in looking at the financial reports for the DeKalb County school system?
The Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts has done the audits for DeKalb Schools, the external audits for DeKalb Schools, for more than 25 years. I had records dating back to 25 years ago, so I know that they've done the audits for more than 25 years. I'm not sure what happened before, but they audit school districts all in colleges and technical institutions all across the state of Georgia. They're familiar with fund accounting, and they're familiar with what the requirements are that school districts need to meet.
And during the period that you were CFO, did the state auditor give an unqualified opinion about the status of the DeKalb County financial condition?
Yes.
And do you know what that was?
The opinion was unqualified for each year that I was there and each year that I was chief financial officer. Within that opinion, they issued findings or not. And in the first audit that I actually went through, there were 9 audit findings. The year after that, it dropped from 9 to 3. The year after that, it dropped from 3 to 0. In the 25 years that I am aware that the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts did audits for the school district, that was the first time ever that there were no findings. The year after that, there was 1, and the year after that, it went back to 0. So something that hadn't happened in 25 years happened twice under my direction as CFO.
And the impact of their unqualified opinion, did that mean that the district had met all the requirements that the state had as far as their financial status?
Yes.
Okay. Were you, while you worked for the district, did you have an opportunity to work with the district purchasing textbooks?
Yes.
And are you aware of the claim that the district spent money on textbooks, but there were no textbooks actually given to students or to schools?
Yes, I think that's unfounded, but yes, I'm aware of the claim.
And you said that's unfounded. Could you explain to us why?
The claim, I think, arose from a lack of understanding and, frankly, a lack of questioning about the process in which the textbooks were acquired. DeKalb Schools, with board approval, entered into a lease to acquire textbooks. It was groundbreaking information at the time, and we were able to, when other school districts were not able to acquire textbooks for their students, we were able to do so. We did it in order to make sure our payments matched what we were receiving for textbooks and that textbook costs didn't vary widely from year to year. It was done through Bank of America Merrill Lynch. The lease was actually performed through them, and we had to go as a district and purchase the textbooks that were adopted, again, by the Board of Education, and then submit to Bank of America Merrill Lynch invoices and canceled check copies of the books that were purchased before Bank of America Merrill Lynch would reimburse the school district for the textbooks. I am an individual, my department is fairly small, and I am certain that Bank of America Merrill Lynch would not put itself on the line for more than $25 million for textbooks that we didn't
Objection,
buy.
Your Honor. He's speculating as to what another entity
I
may do.
would have to sustain that objection.
Okay. And you mentioned that you had to provide Bank of America with invoices. Were these invoice copies? Is that invoices from the people you purchased the books from?
Correct.
Okay. And you said you also had to provide canceled checks to them. Is that correct?
Yes.
And were you all actually paying for the books in advance and then being reimbursed?
Yes.
Okay. And is that why Bank of America required proof that you had actually purchased these books?
Yes.
Once the books were purchased, what happened to them?
The books were delivered and signed for at the textbook warehouse, and at the time it was located at the San Moss Service Center on Montreal Road, and from there they
Your Honor,
were...
he's not established that he's testifying from a lack of personal knowledge of this.
Okay, well, I'll ask him a foundation question. Are you aware of what happened to the books once they were purchased?
They went to the textbook warehouse at San Moss Service Center on Montreal Road.
Okay, and how do you know that's where they went?
That's what the ship to on the invoices show.
Okay, all right. Do you have any doubt that the district actually purchased textbooks?
None whatsoever.
Okay. Now, moving on, are you aware of the board policy DJE?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you aware that that policy changed in March of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you still in the CFO of DeKalb County Schools at that time?
I was not.
Okay. When you were the CFO of DeKalb County Schools, did you ever have occasion to provide any reports in regards to policy DJE?
Yes.
What is policy DJE?
Okay, and I'll refer the witness and Your Honor to Petitioner's Exhibit 20.
Is this something we've agreed is coming into evidence?
Not yet, Your Honor.
All right. You all have a copy of this?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Your
Go
Honor.
ahead. Go ahead.
And Mr. Turk, have you had a chance to look at the policy that's in front of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And it says that board policy purchasing, and it says descriptor code DJE. Do you know what policy DJE was?
It was commonly referred to as the purchasing policy.
Okay. And did this policy govern how the district made purchases?
Yes.
If you would turn to page 7 of the policy. And go to paragraph 4.
Yes,
Well, if you would just quickly read that and let me know when you're done.
I'm done.
Okay. Are you aware of the policy contained in paragraph 4 on page 7 being the policy that the district adopted in regards to policy DJE?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask that this policy be moved into the record.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor, she had originally submitted on her exhibit list an incorrect copy of the policy, but she, in her amended exhibit list, has identified the correct policy, and we do not object to its tender.
And I believe the court has the correct policy in
All right.
front of it.
All right. Exhibit 20 will be admitted into evidence. Petitioner's Exhibit 20.
Now, Mr. Turk, in looking at this policy, it says that all purchases and contracts under $100,000 shall be reported to the board monthly for information only, reflecting vendor, goods or services purchased, amount of purchase, and the names of staff members who signed the approval. Was that the policy that was in effect when you were the CFO?
Your Honor, I apologize. That does not match up with the policy that we have, I don't believe.
I emailed you a copy of the correct policy. This is the old one. That's the revised one. Is this the policy that was in effect when you were the CFO?
No.
And how did the policy change from the time that you were the CFO?
From memory, the approval level for all purchases and contracts was $50,000 instead of $100,000, and it needed to be reported to the board on a monthly basis. And it included, for information only, reflecting vendor goods and services purchased, the amount of the purchase, but it did not have language related to the names of the staff member who signed the approval. And again, that is from memory.
Okay. And did you provide the board on a monthly basis the information consistent with the policy at that time?
On a monthly basis, yes.
And do you know how this policy came to be adopted by the district?
There was a request to increase the level of approval for
So, Your
board
Honor,
approval from.
He's already established that he was not CFO at the time this policy was adopted. I'd asked that a foundation be established for his answering.
What foundational question have you asked so far?
Well, when I asked if he is aware of how it came to be adopted, and he was about to tell us yes or no, or how he knows.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
You can go
Let's
ahead
hear
and
it.
answer.
It came about because there was a request to increase the approval authority of the superintendent from $50,000 to $100,000.
And do you know who made the request?
Dr. Atkins.
And do you know who put forward this particular policy language?
Directly, no.
Okay. Do you know how the process typically works?
The process typically works, and we, as a district, had undergone a complete policy review. Those who the policy would fall under the responsibility for, so for instance, purchasing would fall under finance, finance would fall under me. I would write the language, have it approved by the attorneys, have it presented to the superintendent. There was a policy committee set up, much like the Budget, Audit, Finance, and Facilities Committee. That committee would review the policy, thumbs it up or thumbs it down, and then send it to the full board for approval.
Do you know if the administration and the board, if they were given 30 days to review policies?
There were two reads. So the policy, after it made it through the policy committee, would go to a board meeting where the board would vote on the policy to sit for 30 days to allow the public as well as the board to ensure that they are all familiar with whatever the policy is, whatever the policy changes are. There was the original policy, there was the amended policy, and then there was a red line version that were all posted on the web so that people could see what the changes were. And then in 30 days, the board would come back, reconvene, and vote on any policy changes.
And as a staff member, if a board member asks you to comply with a policy, were you required to comply with that policy?
Yes.
And you would have looked to the language of the policy. Would you have looked to the language of the policy to determine what you needed to provide?
Yes.
And in this case, what would you have needed to provide if a board member asked for information consistent with the policy?
For Section 4,
Yes.
all purchases under $50,000,
I agreed to 100,000 actually.
what I was asked.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I misinterpreted your
My
question.
question is pursuant to the policy before you today,
Yes.
what would you have had to provide?
That there would have been a report indicating all purchases of $99,999.99 that included the vendors, what the goods or services that were acquired, and the exact amount of the purchase, as well as the name of, or names of those that approved the purchase.
Okay. Now, as a staff member and CFO, did you ever make presentations before the Board of Education?
Monthly, at a minimum.
During those presentations, did Dr. Walker ever ask you questions about what you were presenting?
Yes.
And was there anything about the way he questioned you that was inappropriate?
Nothing stands out, no.
Did he ever yell at you in the course of questioning you?
Not that I can recall, no.
Did Dr. Walker in any way instill fear in you?
No.
I have no additional questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Just a moment, Your Honor. Well, Mr. Turk, my name is Kevin Bradbury with the Attorney General's Office. I just have a couple of questions for you. If I understood your testimony correctly, it was that DeKalb County School District never had a deficit with the exception of the year after you left. Is that right?
As far as
Objection, Your Honor, that misrepresents what I said. I asked if they ever had a end-of-year deficit.
Your Honor, he just said that that was what his testimony was.
I don't think he misrepresented. I understood where you went and where he's going.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Did you answer that question? I didn't hear anything.
I did not.
Why don't you start over again?
All right. Is it your testimony that DeKalb County School District did not have a deficit with the exception of the fiscal year after you left?
After I left the position of CFO, it was actually the same fiscal year.
Okay.
2012.
It was 2012 fiscal year.
Are you familiar with the term balanced budget?
I am.
Could you explain that to the judge?
Balanced budget means that at the end of a year or at the end of a budget, if you take the beginning fund balance, add revenues, subtract expenditures, that at the end of the year, you still have fund balance.
All right. And are you familiar with differences in accounting procedures?
Meaning?
Meaning in ways that you report revenues or debts or expenditures?
Yes.
And are you aware that there are different ways of reporting those?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that if you delayed reporting servicing of debts, that logically you wouldn't be reporting on them at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the KPMG report that was a review of DeKalb School District's finances?
I'm not familiar. I have seen it.
Okay. You have seen it? All right. You were talking about some textbooks earlier, and you said that there was a line of credit that was taken out with Bank of America to support the use of textbooks. That line of credit, that was $25 million, correct?
It was somewhere in that range.
And you said that as part of that line of credit, the idea was to purchase textbooks.
Yes.
And how much money in that line of credit did the DeKalb School District eventually spend?
I don't know because it still went on after I left. I can tell you that it was not fully extended at the time that I left.
Okay. Would you say that it was at least $8 million?
Yes.
Okay. So the DeKalb School District spent at least $8 million on textbooks from this line of credit. You said that to get these things, you submitted invoices.
Yes.
Okay. And on all of those, you're saying you had to submit invoices before you could basically get that line of credit.
Request reimbursement. Yes.
Okay. Did it surprise you that the KPMG report stated that that DeKalb just couldn't find the invoices for almost $1.5 million of textbooks that were purchased?
Very much so.
That did surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did it also surprise you that the invoices, 10 purchase orders of those, were dated for before 2008?
No, it does not surprise me.
Okay, so it would make, so from what you're saying, it doesn't surprise you that the invoices were actually books that had already been purchased.
That was the way the line of credit worked. We had to purchase the books in order to get the reimbursement.
Okay, so you had already purchased the books, and you're coming to Bank of America for money to pay for those books.
There were textbooks which were qualified under the lease.
Okay, and I think you also stated that DeKalb School District also ran a surplus every year that you were on the school board, or as the CFO, is that right?
The surplus increased year over year.
The surplus increased. Okay. Are you familiar with the Sachs report that was produced on October 17th to 19th of 2012?
Bits and pieces.
Okay. Are you? Did you realize that the finding there was that there was a general fund unaudited balance of negative $25 million?
Objection. That the question doesn't tell him during what time period that unaudited balance was.
Well, the Sachs report is in evidence. If he knows, he may not know.
Well,
you
Your
know?
Honor, actually the Sachs report is not yet in evidence.
Well, I thought I'm assuming it's in here somewhere.
Well, it may be in there, but we haven't stipulated to the admission.
She objected. We're going to have to lay a
Gotcha.
foundation for it.
Okay. All right. All right. So, all right, we're back to the objection then. State your question again.
Are you aware that auditors looking at DeKalb School District found that in July 1st of 2012, there's a $25 million budget deficit?
No.
Were you familiar with Sachs' findings that the board chair, Mr. Walker, didn't differentiate between having a balanced budget and operating that system in a manner that adheres to that budget?
No.
Would you agree with me that if you fail to operate the system in a manner consistent with your budget expectations, that you're going to get different numbers?
Restate your question.
Would you agree with me that in order to effectuate the balanced budget, you have to abide by the budget you've set for yourself?
Yes.
Were you familiar with Sachs' findings that stated that the district does not keep the monetary deficit on the forefront of its spending, the school board in particular?
I was not aware because I was not a part of the deficit.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
All right. Redirect.
I just have a quick redirect, Your Honor. In your interactions with Dr. Walker, did he have an understanding of the budget process and the budget issues facing the DeKalb County School District?
Yes.
And prior to fiscal year 12, had the school board or the district operated within its budget?
Yes, so much as to say that the reserves or the fund balance year over year increased in many of the years.
Thank you. Nothing additional, Your Honor.
Any recross?
Nothing further.
All right. Thank you very much. Now,